Join us on an investigative journey as we educate each other on a scientific discovery, concept, or phenomenon.
Then we'll take a dive into the complex and misleading world of pseudoscience to sort the factual from the fabricated.
I'm Matt McCabe.
And I'm Levi Bateman.
And this is Idio Facto.
Most certainly is, and what are the odds of that, eh? That we're back again.
What are the odds?
What are the odds?
That is a difficult question to answer, Levi. I would say probably almost impossible to answer that one.
Impossible?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'd say they're pretty high, to be honest, because, well, it's really a question of whether you believe in free will or not, because if you do believe in free will, then the reason that we're here is because we made it happen. If you don't believe in free will, then you believe that it's already happened in the past or whatever. That's another philosophical argument that I won't even remotely get into this episode.
Well, rather than saying, what are the odds, what if I asked you, what are the chances that we're here? Is that getting closer to a better segue for you to sort of introduce what you're doing this week?
Not really a good segue at all, but, you know.
Especially because you're talking about killer whales.
No, I mean, by this stage, people have seen the title of the episode, so I think they actually know what I'm talking about. But
yeah, dope.
Let me ask you, what do you think is more likely, getting killed by a shark or dying in a plane crash?
I've heard the plane crash and car accident comparison, but I don't know about a plane crash versus a shark. I'd say it's probably more likely to get killed by a shark.
Well, your chances of dying by a shark attack are in Australia, about 1 in 214,000.
Right.
Your odds of dying in a plane crash are about 1 in 5,000.
Wow.
So you're much more likely to die in a plane crash than you are by a shark attack. This is over your lifetime. Your odds of dying by a shark attack are 1 in 214,000, and your odds of dying in a plane crash are about 1 in 5,000. They're pointless statistics, utterly pointless statistics anyway, because the answer is that neither is technically more likely than the other, really. If you're flying in a plane, your chances of dying in a plane crash are astronomically larger than if you're on the ground. But your chances of dying by a shark attack while you're in the plane are virtually none, unless someone has managed to smuggle an air-breathing shark on board.
That's terrifying.
This might be the sequel to Snakes on a Plane. Sharks on a Plane. No. So, it really depends on where you are. Like, if you're in the ocean, then your chances of dying by a plane crash are virtually zero, unless, the plane crashes into the water that you happen to be in. But, they're meaningless to compare. It's just a meaningless comparison for all intents and purposes. It is a good way, though, of illustrating how humans misunderstand and misuse statistics on a regular basis.
That's a very good point, because that statistic, you could argue, doesn't forget anybody. It is true for the entire population, whereas if you made a vow to just never enter an airplane...
Yeah, well, yeah, very, 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 very unlikely to die in a plane crash.
That's right.
Yeah, and so your chances of dying are a lot lower than 1 in 5,000.
Yeah.
Which means that everyone else's is very slightly higher.
I guess so.
Anyway, we as humans are built to see patterns where there aren't necessarily patterns. It's much more helpful from an evolutionary standpoint to immediately assume that a rustle in the bushes is a lion and not the wind, for example, because if you run from the wind, you just look a bit silly. But if you don't run from a lion, then you're dead.
Right.
So it's that kind of thinking that leads us to trust our subjective personal experiences and anecdotes from people that we know more than we trust objective probabilities. We find probabilities just fundamentally difficult to understand as a concept, and I include myself in that assessment because probability does not come naturally to me, and I constantly have to remind myself that I need to be thinking objectively about life, really. So I'll give you a few quick examples to show how we find probabilities and how we find chance in general hard to comprehend. I'm not the least qualified person to give this overview, but I'm pretty close to the least qualified person, so it'll be pretty simple.
That makes two of us. Maybe I'm the least qualified.
Maybe. Anyway, let's start with this ridiculous and hilarious news story. Has a happy ending, so don't get too concerned about that. But a man named Tyler Moon was running in a marathon in Minneapolis in the United States. He wore a bib with his number on it. You know how they wear the little patch with your number? And on the patch, you can choose a slogan. And he chose the slogan Jesus, J-E-S-U-S, saves. Jesus saves. During the race, he suffered some sort of cardiac event and his heart stopped. And another runner stopped and gave him CPR and was eventually able to resuscitate him. And his name was Jesus. J-E-S-U-S. What are the chances, hey? Well, what are the chances, though? Like, ideally, we would take the number of people named Jesus in Minneapolis that attended this marathon and no CPR. But obviously, I couldn't find the statistics on that number. So for our purposes, I looked at how many people in the United States have the name Jesus. And there's about 261,000 people in the US. About half of the US population claim to know how to perform CPR. So assuming that Jesus's comply with that statistic, that leaves us with about 130,000 Jesuses that know CPR in the United States. The US has a population of about 330 million people. So that means that there's about a 1 in 2,500 chance that any person you come across in the USA is named Jesus and knows CPR.
Right.
So there were nearly 10,000 runners in this marathon. So that doesn't include spectators, which means it's statistically likely that there were actually 4 people named Jesus that knew CPR at that marathon.
Right.
So it's not actually that rare.
No,
it's not actually that amazing. There are 4 people in that whole race that were named Jesus and knew CPR.
And considering that everyone that runs a marathon is probably going to finish within 1 to 2 hours of each other, you're probably going to be somewhere near CPR performing Jesus at any point in a marathon.
The thing is, though, is that in this particular case, the chances of this event happening were 1 in 1, because that's actually what happened.
Right.
So, like, events that have happened in the past have a probability of 1 because they did happen. But that might be a discussion for another time that's a bit beyond what we're going to talk about today. All of these numbers are obviously massively simplified. To get more accurate numbers, I'd have to know how many Jesuses live in Minneapolis, how many of those know CPR, how many were participating in the race. All of, like, very specific numbers I would need to know to give you the exact chances of that actually happening. How many people were in his, like, vicinity at the time, all that sort of stuff. But it's just to illustrate that rare events and coincidences aren't actually as rare and coincidental as we think intuitively. And here's another interesting thought about this one. There were more than a dozen people that came to this man's aid. And if they were all called Bob, Ashley, and Sue, then this would hardly even be a news story outside the local Minneapolis Bulletin.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings me to another problem with our concept of probability, and that's over-reporting. And over-reporting is the main reason that we have such a warped sense of probability. And it's not just news media, it's not modern news media either. It's not a new problem at all. The stories that people tell each other are all about weird coincidences and rare events. Otherwise, they wouldn't be interesting at all.
That's true.
There would be no point in telling stories because it would be like, oh, hey, Levi, I went down to the shop the other day and I walked in and I gave the man the money and then I walked out with the goods that I paid for. Oh, cool story, bro.
To be fair, though, that's not too much different to the stories that you do tell.
I didn't say I was a good storyteller. I'm just saying that the stories that persist over a long period of time in human history are about rare and interesting events.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
So the next time that you hear a story like that, just think about whether this is an unlikely event or whether it's actually probably likely that it was going to happen at some stage. Given that there are literally infinite events happening at any one time, eventually rare events will occur. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm not explaining that very well.
No, that's a very good point because I guess what do you classify as an event? And this comes back to our point that we always talk about as humans really finding it difficult to work around a continuum. You know, we need to think of different things as events. I am now driving. I have now pulled up. I am now at the marathon, you know. But you're right. Anything could be, depending on where you draw the line, there could be any number of strange coincidental stories that you could tell in a day.
I've heard stories of people who go on holiday to New York City, which is one of the most populous cities in America, and they see someone from their hometown and they
Yes.
go, whoa, what are the chances of us seeing you here? New York is a popular destination for tourists from Australia. There's a lot of people in New York, yeah, but there's not that many people in comparison to the rest of the world. Again, you'd be frequenting the more touristy parts of New York, which is where other tourists will be. And you may have walked past the same person in New York 15 times that day and not recognized them. But you recognize this person, and therefore you're not going to just walk past them and not notice.
That's right. And chances are, someone that you know that lives in your town or is in your social circles is probably likely to take leave or go on a holiday at a similar time to what you would be.
Yeah, when you actually sit down and think about what are the chances of this happening,
Yeah.
it's actually not as rare and coincidental as you intuitively think.
Mm-hmm.
And intuition is a major problem when it comes to understanding statistics in a human perspective. A good example of that is a logical fallacy called the gambler's fallacy. Have you heard about the gambler's fallacy before?
No, I haven't.
Okay, well, say you walk into a casino and you're walking past the roulette tables and you notice that one of the tables has had 8 black numbers come up in a row. Now, for those who don't know how a roulette table works, where have you been? But anyway, it's a round wheel, and the employee of the casino throws a ball around and it spins and spins and it lands in a little hollow that has a number attached to it. And each of the numbers is either black or red, and then there's a 0 that's a green. So you can bet on the most general bet that you can have is either on it being a red number or a black number. And you have ostensibly a 50-50 chance of it landing in a red and landing in a black. Now, that's not actually true because there's a green number as well. Which makes it slightly less than a 50-50 chance. But just for our purposes, imagine that there's a 50-50 chance that it will come up red or black. So you walk through and you see that a table has had 8 black numbers come up in a row. So you put a whole bunch of money on red because what are the chances that the next number comes up black, right? There's been 8 blacks in a row. How unlikely will it be to be black again? And the answer is that it's the same as it's always been. It's a little bit less than 50% because the roulette table has no memory of what's happened in the past. It has no conscience. It has no way of telling, oh, I've had 8 black numbers now. I better make this one a red just to regress to the mean. If you did it 150 times, it would be very unlikely that you would get 150 blacks. But it would still be possible for that to happen.
That's true. And I guess that odd of 50% or 1 in 2 or whatever you want to call it, that doesn't necessarily mean that if you spin it twice, that one of those times is going to come up black and one of the time is going to come up red. Because that chance is, I guess, the average over the beginning of time until the end of time.
Yes. And it's a theoretical probability, which is quite distinct from a practical result. But if you were to start from scratch, the chances of rolling 9 black numbers in a row is 1 in 2 times 1 in 2 times 1 in 2 for 9 instances, which is 1 in 512.
Right.
So if you were to do 512 rounds of 9 balls dropping into red or black holes, you would get one where you get 9 blacks.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
But even that is a theoretical probability.
Yeah.
And you may do it in real life and not get any, or you might get 5.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's a theoretical probability, and that can be completely not reflective of reality.
Right. So what you're saying is looking at the previous results, because if you've ever been into a casino, you will know that a roulette table will have a screen displaying what the previous 20 or 30 results were. And so people will often use that to base their next bet. But what you're saying is there is no point whatsoever in looking at the past results, because each result refreshes the chance of getting a red or a black or a green.
That's right. There's absolutely no point in looking at the history.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're better off flipping a coin.
You could flip a coin. You've got a 1 in 2 chance of getting a heads or tails, right?
Yeah.
So if you flip a coin 5 times and you get 5 heads, then that's not that unlikely. It's 2 to the power of 5, which is 32. So the chances of that happening are 1 in 32. But if you flip a coin 5 times and you get 5 heads, the chances of you getting 5 heads is 1, because that's what's happened. Do you know what I mean? This is why it's so hard to understand probability, is because you can only predict the future theoretically. And then when the event actually happens, the probability is irrelevant.
Yeah, that's true. 'Cause it's already been written.
Exactly. So going back to our original situation, the fact that there's a 1 in 512 chance that you'll get 9 blacks in a row is irrelevant if 9 blacks in a row come up because, wow, that's a relatively rare event. But like, so what? It's not predictive of what's going to happen in the next round, nor is it predictive of what's going to happen over the next 512 rounds. It's just a theoretical probability.
And in fact, basing your choice on the roulette table based off the previous 20 or 30 instances may actually skew your opinion. If you didn't know anything about the odds of a roulette table otherwise, it might skew your choice. Because if you were to look at say for example, you were to look at the screen and there was 20 out of those 30 previous results were all black, then you'd say, oh, there's a much higher chance that it's going to land on black. When theoretically, in actual fact, it's exactly the same chance.
Yep, there's no difference whatsoever. So the gambler's fallacy is a really interesting logical fallacy, and it is why we interpret a stretch of cool days as meaning that climate change is not happening, or a sudden spike in dog attacks as reported by the news represents an overall trend of an increase in dog attacks. Richard Dawkins refers to the bit of the world that humans reside in as middle world. So we're not equipped biologically to deal with atoms at one end of the scale and the universe at the other end of the scale. We sit firmly in the middle at our human scale.
That's true.
We can't detect the slow movement of continents or the building of mountains or the sliding of glaciers without instrumentation because we don't have the biological tools to do so. And that, more than anything else, is the reason that we can't comprehend probability, because we don't experience enough events ourselves to accurately form a picture of the world in our heads. And the only way we can do that is en masse with mathematics. As boring as that sounds, you have to constantly fight with I constantly fight with myself, with my intuitive, subjective, anecdotal experiences. And I constantly have to remind myself that it's statistically very unlikely that, I'm going to die in a plane crash. But that doesn't help me every time I get onto a plane. Do you know what I mean? Like, I still get nervous when I get onto a plane because I think, oh, what if I die in a plane crash? But then statistically, that's highly unlikely. So the logical part of my brain is fighting with the emotional part of my brain on a daily basis.
And the other thing is that you can't rely on these statistics to save you either, if you know what I mean. Like, for example, if you knew that the odds of dying in a car crash were, and I don't know what it is, but I'm guessing the chance is much higher than in a plane crash. So, for example, have you found the odds of dying in a car crash?
In America, it's 1 in 84, which was probably a bit higher in America than it is in Australia.
That's really high. That's much higher than I would have thought. But I'll still use the same odd, for example. If you knew that getting into a car, there's a 1 in 84 chance that at some point in your lifetime you're going to die in a car accident. But if you're someone that drives with their knees, well then your odds of dying in a car crash are likely to be much higher. Yeah. Or if you're somebody who texts while you drive, there's a much higher chance that you're going to be in a car accident. So you can't use these historic averages and odds to save you, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. Probability is so interesting because it's predictive, but it's not predictive. Do you know what I mean? It's predictive of overall trends, but on a personal, individual level, it's not predictive in the slightest.
Yeah.
And I think that everyone should share my difficulty with everyday life, dealing with the chances of things happening in everyday life and the emotional. Well, actually, it's kind of refreshing sometimes when, like, the emotional side of me starts to take a bit of control and the logical side comes in and says, no, wait, you're being really illogical now. Anyway, I have a lot more to say on the topic of probability, but I'll leave it there for today. So consider this a part 1 of the probability puzzle. And there'll be more to come because there's heaps more to talk about in probability. And I know we seem to say this every week, but it's way more complicated than it seems at first glance. But anyway, I would encourage anyone to look at the show notes. I'll put some links in there on basic introductory sort of probability stuff. It's super interesting if you're a bit of a nerd like I am, but probability is helpful in so many ways in your life. I wish that it was taught in schools in a bit more of an entertaining way than it is, because I remember hating it at school. But since I went to uni and I actually didn't have very good statistics lecturers. But anyway, I find statistics to be super fascinating, especially when it applies to everyday life.
Well, you're right. It can be potentially quite a dry topic, but I guess if you've got the right teacher, then it's same with anything. It can be quite entertaining. And I think there's probably quite a high chance that our listeners will find this very interesting.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Have you ever had your tarot cards read?
No.
Okay. Good.
That's the end of this episode of Video Facto.
That's all I've got, unfortunately. I couldn't find much on it. No. It doesn't surprise me that you haven't, just judging by the kind of person that you are, and we are, really.
But you have. You've told a story on Video Facto about how you had your tarot cards read.
I have, yeah. And I was not convinced in any way, shape or form about tarot cards.
See, now that surprises me.
Yeah.
Because from what I've read, you really have to do it. And once you do it, man, you'll believe it.
Yeah, well, I only did it for a little bit of fun. So when I was having my tarot cards read, I did notice that there were a few things at play that may give the impression that tarot cards aren't complete rubbish. So let's get into tarot cards and find out what hand we're going to get dealt. So I actually just touched on it there. Tarot cards started out as playing cards.
Right.
In the 15th and 16th century in Europe, mainly in Italy, where the game was called tarocchi, and in France, where it was just called tarot. They also played tarot in Germany. So, like our common deck of cards, tarot traditionally has 4 suits and is played similarly to how you would play, euchre or Uno or any other sort of card game. Tabletop-based card game. I don't know the rules, but it's not overly important for the purposes of this episode.
No, it is. I want to know how it works.
Well, that's a bonus episode, all right?
Let's just stop recording and can you go and search and tell me how it works, please? Because that's the only important thing that I need to know about tarot.
All right, let's stop now. And we're back! I've just taught Matt how to play tarot.
The magic of editing. Woo!
Flew to Sydney, and and it sounds like I'm just straight back into it. But
thanks for educating me on how to play tarot. I'm really glad that I know now.
Not a bad game.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a lot of fun.
Anyway, there's a really confusing history of tarot cards and different types of decks and when they first started to emerge and who used them and when they sort of got transformed from a playing card to a divination tool. But the history is not really important either. All that you need to really know is that they were just playing cards, and then, like many human traditions really, its purpose and meaning got totally twisted completely from its original intended use. So if you don't know what I'm talking about when I refer to tarot cards, I'll give you a sort of a quick run through. And I'm not an expert, I'm not going to get this totally right, so just bear with me. So it's estimated that there are over 400 different types of tarot card decks in existence today. Most tarot card decks consist of 78 cards. So usually the card reader, the person performing the reading, will ask the subject to shuffle the cards and then lay them face down on the table. Then they'll ask the subject to choose a certain number of those cards. So it might be 10 cards that the subject feels that they are most drawn to. So the dealer or reader will then turn the cards over, and with much oohing and ahhing, they will reveal the meanings of each of these cards to the subjects.
Right.
So cards of different suits relate to different aspects of a person's life. So the card might represent love, loss, death, health, wealth, opportunities, anxieties, etc.
So can you give me some examples of the cards? Like, what does the King of Spades represent, for example?
They're not...
No, I know that the King of Spades isn't one of them, but I was just making the point, like, I do have a serious question. What is the difference between, like, a tarot card and a regular 52-card playing deck? Like, why are we using tarot cards to do this and not, casino playing cards?
I guess the point is that you could, but tarot cards, the deck looks entirely different. So the back of the card is still just all the one pattern, like a playing card would be.
Yeah.
But then the face of the card is something entirely different. So the death card might be a skeleton standing on a pile of corpses, and the love card might be two lovers sitting together at a table or something like that.
So is there only one death card in the whole pack?
To be honest, I actually don't know.
Oh.
There are 78 cards in total.
Whoa.
And there's a division of major and minor arcane cards. So there's something like 22 cards that are the major arcane cards, and then the other 56 are sort of the minor archetypes. And the major ones refer to the major personality types and life experiences and things like that. They're the ones that most people sort of care about.
So I'm getting whiffs of other pseudosciences here, like chiropractic and acupuncture and things like that, in that the more complicated you make it seem, the more legitimate it comes across.
Oh, yeah. Which is why I kind of didn't really want to get too much into the history or the actual information about what a tarot card deck consists of and why, because it doesn't matter what it consists of. And it's like when we discussed horoscopes. There are really, really confusing star charts and birth charts that you can learn to interpret, but they actually don't mean anything. It's kind of like learning Klingon, if you know what I mean. You know, you can learn it and you can come out with an understanding.
And it's really complicated.
It's very complicated, but at the end of the day, it's an entirely made-up language.
Right. Based on nothing. I mean, all languages are made up, but it's not based on any... I mean, it's based on history, I guess. That's the language thing is probably a bad example, to be honest, because it's like...
I guess that's it. You can still use it to communicate, whereas...
like some people will understand you in Klingon. Other people who learn Klingon, like just because it's a made-up language doesn't mean that it's, you know, like Pig Latin's a made-up language. It's still, you can communicate with other people in Pig Latin.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. But the main... And it was a good question about what cards and how many death cards and love cards there might be. But I sort of didn't really look it up because I guess I sort of already know that it doesn't matter. But what I was more interested in is, what do these readings mean? How does one make a reading? And how is it actually relevant to the subject?
Right.
So the cards that you drew out of this randomly shuffled deck and laid out on the table are supposed to be the exact cards that you were supposed to see. So they will answer questions that you have about your life and what you might have coming at you in the future. So essentially that's a very quick rundown of what a tarot card reading might look like. I might not have got it totally right, so I'm sorry to any of our listeners who are tarot card readers, but if I missed a step and taught you tarot the wrong way, there's some great news for you. You'll still be just as qualified to read tarot cards as if I had taught you properly. Sorry if that was a little bit cynical.
No, it wasn't. Yes, it was. Yep. No, it definitely was.
All right. So I'll start to get into some of the, I guess, evidence and papers and sciencey side of tarot cards that I looked at. So I found a paper by someone called Dr. Itai Ivdsen, who is a qualified psychotherapist, but also claims to be very spiritual. So it's really interesting looking at his website. And I didn't look too much at his work, but I did read one of his papers on tarot cards. And regardless of his spirituality, it didn't really matter. The paper that he wrote was a little bit wishy-washy and fairly credulous, but there were two parts of the paper that I think are worth mentioning. So the first is his discussion on the potential, we'll call it the mode of action of tarot cards. And the second is his opinion on why he thinks people are drawn to tarot cards. So in this paper, he explains that there are two explanations behind how tarot cards may work. And one is paranormal and the other is psychological. Straight up, what do you think the explanation might be? Is it the paranormal one or the psychological one? Can't believe I'm asking you this.
Geez. Oh, wow, you've stumped me here. Maybe the psychological?
Well,
I'm not entirely sure about it, but something about a placebo effect comes into my mind.
All right, well,
I feel like that might be psychological.
You've made your choice. You've been dealt your hand. Now keep your cards close to your chest. So I'll run you through. This is a quote from the paper. So he says, "The paranormal explanation claims that the cards portray opportunities, hidden motives, and potentials, therefore allowing clarity concerning the individual's questions and conflicts. The cards, according to the paranormal explanation, provide a reflection of the client's inner processes." So essentially what this means is that there is some sort of higher power within the cards that knows your inner thoughts and desires and can tell the future and express all of this through the cards that you've shuffled and laid out and chosen.
Okay.
So how does that explanation sound to you?
Yeah, I don't know. It's sounds good. Yep.
Pretty good, yeah.
Yep. Can I maybe offer an alternative? I'm going to preempt what I think he might say about the psychological explanation.
That's massively cutting my lunch if you do, but go for it.
That's okay. I don't care. What about, could it be that given these cards, you are given a vague explanation of what it kind of applies to in a lot of situations, and you personally ascribe meaning to those cards based on your individual situation at the time?
You have just about nailed it. So somehow you've managed to come up with this psychological or non-paranormal explanation. So this explanation is based upon two psychological points. So firstly, we're dealing with the Barnum effect, and secondly, there's some cold reading at play.
Mm-hmm.
So the Barnum effect, as you mentioned, refers to our tendency to interpret general statements as applying specifically and accurately to one's own circumstances, whereas cold reading refers to a set of deceptive psychological techniques that are being used in the psychic reading to create the impression that the reader has paranormal activity. And whilst the Barnum effect is interesting and important, it's more of a passive effect, if that makes sense, during a tarot card reading. So all humans really have this Barnum effect just built into their minds. So that the tarot card reader doesn't have to do anything. They're just using the Barnum effect to their advantage. But the cold reading is the technique that's actively used by the card readers that makes it seem like they've got some sort of sixth sense or, insight or something. So cold reading is different to hot reading. I'm not sure if you've heard of a hot reading before.
I have. Isn't that where you have some information beforehand?
It's actually where you sit in a sauna with a good book.
Oh,
and
there you go.
Sort of get through it for as long as you can bear,
that
really.
Sounds lovely, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could also be that the medium, we'll call them that, does literally a Google search or a Facebook stalk on the person that they know that they're going to be performing a reading on. So they've already got all this background knowledge. So when they suddenly come up and say, I'm getting an M, is it an M, Mary? And the subject says, Mary, that's my mother. They go, oh, wow. So it seems like they're in touch with the other side, but really they've just seen it on their Facebook page.
Yeah.
So cold reading is different to hot reading. So cold reading uses body language, age, accent, education, clothing, hairstyle, just the general appearance and reaction to various statements to actually gather a great deal of information about the subjects. For example, a card reader may reveal a card related to money, and then judging by the reaction of the subject and their appearance and the general conversation that they've had, the reader will either steer the reading towards the direction of money lost or money gained. And the same could be said about a love card, a travel card. Any of these cards really could be revealed and then read in a way that relates to a subject based on the findings of this cold reading.
A good example of that is that you and Christy had your tarot cards read together, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
The reader said that you were soulmates or something like that. Is that?
One of the points she said, oh, I can tell that you're very close to family. She said, family is very important to you. She said this to me. But I thought that was pretty obvious to her, seeing as though
you were with your family.
Phoebe was standing right there, and she, I've introduced Phoebe and said, "This is my sister." So yeah, she's using these cold reading techniques to gain some information about me.
What did she say about Christy?
I can't remember in relation to family.
I thought you. I'm pretty sure you told me that she told you that you were soulmates. but
She probably did.
I don't know why I remember that. We must go back and listen to the episode.
No, you're right. She probably did. That seems like a good thing to say to a couple
It does.
who have just paid you to reveal their destiny and future. I wonder how many other couples she would say that to.
All of them?
Maybe.
Most of them, unless there's some pretty bad body language going on.
Yeah. So, obviously you don't need tarot cards to perform a cold reading.
No, but you do need good observational skills.
Exactly. The tarot cards are just a good prop. And if you're great at cold readings, someone like a mentalist, you can imagine, would appear to be very good at reading tarot cards. But you could probably perform the cold reading whether the cards were there or not. It's just a good prompt, I guess, into getting the person to talk about money or love or family or work, whatever it might be.
It's a good distraction as well.
It is, yeah.
Like you can use it as time to think.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's very true. And it's kind of a sleight of hand type technique in a way because people are concentrating on the cards rather than the questions that you're asking.
So what about when you perform, I know that people do their own tarot readings. So that is all the Barnum effect, is it? That's you ascribing meaning to your own cards.
Yeah, essentially. Well, yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's all the Barnum effect. I don't think you can cold read yourself because you'd be hot reading yourself.
Yeah.
Which essentially the Barnum effect is a hot reading of yourself.
Yeah, that's true. It
when
is.
you think about it that way.
Yeah.
So I guess what happens if you remove this cold reading component of a reading, of a tarot card reading? And I didn't find much on tarot cards online, but I did find an old scientific report on an experiment on tarot card readings. It was very interesting, and basically, the subjects had their cards read the normal way. So they sat in front of the card reader, they had their fortune told or tarot cards read or whatever you want to think of it as, and then they had to rate their readings on how closely the readings were related to their life. And in this instance, the readings were all rated very highly. All of the subjects rated their readings as highly accurate. So the second part of the experiment involved taking the subjects away, getting them to shuffle the deck, and then giving the deck to the tarot card reader, or having a third party give the deck to the tarot card reader as it was shuffled, but they didn't tell them which of the subjects had shuffled the deck. So all the tarot card reader was getting was the shuffled deck. And technically, they should just be able to lay the cards out and perform the reading as they would. If there really is some sort of higher power, it doesn't matter whether the person's sitting in front of you or not. So the other thing was it was kind of double blind, so the subjects didn't watch the reader make the reading. And so later on, these subjects had to try and choose which of the readings were theirs. And they had to pick their individual reading out of everyone else's readings.
Right. Oh, can I guess what the results were?
You can have a shot.
Okay.
I don't know what the chances are of you getting it right.
Well, I was going to say no better than chance would be my guess at the results.
Pretty much. So they weren't able to identify which reading was their reading. And instead, most of the subjects opted for the reading that sounded the most general, which sort of further confirms how powerful this Barnum effect is. So if you hear a general statement, you then get thinking, oh, that must be related to my job, car, partner, my gym life, my fitness, whatever it might be. You can write it to you.
And that's the whole concept behind horoscopes, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Very broad.
It's just general, broad, vague statements that you then interpret and apply to your own life.
That's right. And I'm really glad that I've actually discovered the name for this, the Barnum effect, because I'll be able to refer to that from now on.
Yeah, well, that's good. So, yeah, just going back to that first paper that you discussed where there was a psychological and a paranormal explanation, that's two competing hypotheses, is it not?
It is, yeah.
So, with two competing hypotheses...
They're testable hypotheses.
Well,
essentially.
The paranormal explanation isn't testable.
But if it's competing with another one that is, and the other one gets confirmed, I guess that knocks the paranormal one out, does it not?
Well, the paranormal one requires far more assumptions than does the psychological one.
Exactly.
It assumes a new phenomenon that isn't known to exist.
That's right, yeah. Which, if we talk about it a little bit, but if we're to run Occam's razor over that, there are so many assumptions based with a paranormal explanation.
Yeah.
Whereas with a psychological explanation, there's really these two concepts. That's it, the two assumptions that you've got to make.
Which are well known and well
studied.
studied.
Cold reading and the Barnum effect, exactly.
Yeah.
as I explained before, Itai Ivtsen's paper discussed people's attraction.
That's a funny name, sorry.
Oh, it is. Try and...
Itai
his
Ivtsen.
first name.
It sounds like you are speaking Pig Latin.
Itai is how you spell his first name.
Itai, yeah.
And his surname is Ivtzan.
Ivtsen. Okay.
Ivtsen.
Itai
Ivtsen.
Ivtsen. No wonder you've struggled. I can't even say it slowly. Itai Ivtsen.
It might be pronounced Iten or something like that. I don't even know the origin of it. I'm going to have to look that up. Maybe I'll just call him Oodulf Zoodlin.
No.
Oodle toodle oodle oodle. Anyway.
Not again, no.
So as I explained before, Itai Ivtsen's paper discussed people's attractions to tarot cards. And he concluded that the main attraction is, and this is a quote, facing one's own inner processes and receiving a reflection of that which constructs our deeply buried conflicts and questions seems to provide an important experience that many are attracted to. So basically what he's saying is that it's nice to get some answers about the way that you feel. So my answer to that really is let's get better at talking. I think if you needed to clarify how you feel about something, there's some pretty good options. Yeah. You can either just have a good think within yourself, you can chat to friends or family or a counsellor or whoever you need to, but you shouldn't feel like you need to seek help from a supposedly omnipotent deck of cards.
Some of the more, shall we say, rational people that I've spoken to in my life who actually use tarot cards, I don't agree with their reasons for using them, but they tend to steer away from the more supernatural way of explaining how they work. And they say, oh, it's just a tool for me to think about my own thoughts and like it's a reflection tool for me. Mm-hmm. And I find it hard to disagree. I find it hard to look down on that as a method of reflection. But because it's tied up with so much history of, woo, of this pseudoscience, I find it hard to support in any way. But then, I feel silly for arguing with people who do use it as a reflection tool. You know what I mean? Like it's conflicting for me, this one.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. And I guess at the end of the day, all that I would want if I met someone who was into tarot is, well, I don't need anything because it's up to them what they do. But I guess what would make me feel better about them doing it is an acknowledgement that they know that it's not some sort of higher power and they know that it's not fate or something like that that's choosing their cards for them, but it's just a matter of them. It's a means of working your way through your thoughts, which is actually kind of nice.
Yeah. I mean, there are other ways to do that, though, like you said.
Exactly, like I said.
I won't ever be using tarot cards for that purpose.
No.
Well, chances are that that's it for this episode of Idiofacto. Forward all suggestions, hate mail, evidence, and arguments to idiofacto@gmail.com.
And you can reach us through our tarot card system or on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all of our other social platforms at Idiofacto. And the links and tarot card readings are in the show notes.
Ooh, my tarot card readings in the show notes. Wonder what it says. Wow. Maybe I should be a qualified psychotherapist.
Maybe.
Whatever that means.
Fun fact that if you actually break that word up, it can spell psycho the rapist.
Is that a fun fact?
It's a fact.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, you're right. Yep.